What's up, cats? Today we'll be talking about everyone's favorite instruments to write for that very few of us actually know how to play. With the saxophone being by far the easiest instrument in the band, they're usually expected to learn other instruments as well, these being the flute, clarinet, and bass clarinet. But a lot of the time, saxophonists will say they play these instruments and then sound like this. But is it still possible to write parts that sound good for these players? Yeah, why else would I be making this video? Flute is a C instrument, while clarinet and bass clarinet are B-flat instruments, meaning that B-flat in the staff is this note on clarinet and this note on bass clarinet. It's most common for altos to double on flute and tenors to double on clarinet, although these are very interchangeable. Some writers will put alto on clarinet and tenor on flute, and others will give the entire section flutes for some reason. This is one area where knowing the band you're writing for will be extremely helpful, as you'll already know who to write for or can ask band members what doubles they can play. If you don't know these, then it's probably best just to stick to flute for alto and clarinet for tenor. Barry uses bass clarinet almost exclusively. I've only seen clarinet once, on the Bob Cornell arrangement of Pat Metheny's tune Have You Heard, and flute twice, one on some Gordon Goodwin chart I played in high school that I don't remember the name of, and bass flute on Ed Kaye's chart Moonlight. I've actually seen more alto than flute and clarinet combined, and Barry is really the only chair you should give bass clarinet parts to. Not only will alto and tenor mains not usually have a bass clarinet, but I think one of these things is enough for any ensemble. But once you've decided who to give doubles, how do you keep them from sounding like this? One major principle of writing for doubles, and just life in general I suppose, is that it's always nice to have friends. Unless the person you give the doubling part to plays the instrument at a professional level, if you write them an exposed part, it's going to be pretty rough. You can help them out a lot by putting the line in other instruments as well. Even just one instrument doubling the same part can help with pitch. And in the process of blending with other instruments, it won't be as obvious that the tone isn't as good as a professional. Low bass clarinet is the exception, however, as this register is very easy to play in and sounds great as long as the musician actually puts air through the horn. So bass clarinet is fine on its own, but you're going to want some insurance for these two. You also really shouldn't write solos for doubles unless you have a specific player in mind, and even then I would exercise caution. While the other woodwinds are close, they're not close enough to the saxophone for everything to translate fluently. For example, while the upper octave of clarinet is the same as saxophone, the lower octave is a 12th away instead of an octave. So saxophonists who don't really play clarinet will solo exclusively using the upper octave of the instrument. So if they're stuck with one octave, you probably don't want to give them anything too challenging. Personally, I just wouldn't write them at all unless I already know they solo on that instrument really well. And make sure to give them time to switch as well. It depends a lot on the tempo of the tune, but usually 4 to 8 bars is an ideal amount of time to switch. Unlike brass, who can take notes out quickly, but are slow to put them in, saxophones can bring up the double faster, but putting them back in the right spot takes longer. So unless you want your saxophonist throwing the flute across the room, make sure to give them a couple measures of rest so they have time to change. One more thing you have to be mindful of on clarinet is the break. Going from B-flat to C on the clarinet requires them to suddenly change the embouchure and play some of the most resistant notes on the instrument. These can also be really awkward fingering-wise, so you really want to avoid passages that make them cross the break constantly. Think of it like jumping over a lake, while everyone else can just walk across using a bridge. They might be able to keep up at first, but eventually their legs are going to get tired, and they're going to start lagging behind the people able to just use the bridge. Also, don't worry about crossing the break and not knowing about it. If a saxophonist sees that the clarinet part crosses the break, they will let you know about it. While this register of the flute sounds good, it's just impossible to use. It even gets overshadowed by muted trumpets, and while in the studio you could record it and then bring the volume up, it'll just sound unnatural, so there's pretty much no point to writing in this register. This register has the same tone quality, but with the added bonus of actually being able to be heard. But it's still pretty quiet, so you'll mainly want to pair it with muted trumpet or trombones playing quietly. This is the main register flute should be spending its time in, as it blends best with most instruments when it's an octave above them, and also projects the best in this register. Depending on the level of your flute player, you might not want to give them quiet parts in this register, as playing loudly on flute is significantly easier than playing quietly on it. While C isn't a hard cutoff like it is on trumpet, it is when fingerings start being different from saxophone, requiring more time from the flute player to get it under control. Real flute players will sound great up here, and will also be able to play quietly, giving sections a really nice color. One major difference between clarinet and flute is that clarinet can actually play loudly in the low register, and will have an easier time of playing louder than certain notes higher on the instrument. This register is heard more when the clarinet is being used as a color as opposed to the lead voice, which regularly has the clarinet playing higher. These notes are called throat tones, which you'll generally want to avoid. They're very thin, and even professional clarinet players have to work hard to get a good sound out of this range. I really wouldn't recommend having an exposed port here, ever. If you have to use it, it's best as an inner voice of a chord, but even then it might still be a problem as to hard to tune as well. This register is mostly used when clarinet is the lead voice, such as in older chords when clarinet would regularly be the lead voice instead of alto. If used more as a color instrument, it will probably be doubling something else as opposed to leading the section, as this is a much more modern sound. This is pretty much the only register of the bass clarinet you're going to want to use. It's great at playing low notes loudly, or quietly. And the bass clarinet has a more reedy sound than what you get from the baritone. Bass clarinet players might notice that this chart starts at E flat as opposed to C, even though some bass clarinets have a low C extension. In the jazz doubling world, most bari players will only get a low E flat bass clarinet, as they're significantly cheaper, and most charts only go down to E flat anyways. I can only think of one chart I've played that's actually gone lower. This register is the same as clarinet, with all the same problems. But unlike clarinet, there are extremely few use cases for this register. It's extremely quiet on bass clarinet, meaning that it will have to be very exposed for it to be effective. But it's also the hardest register to play on bass clarinet. These notes aren't that bad, but once you get into this range it's extremely hard to play, except for the people who've actually put time into the instrument. So unless they actually play bass clarinet, you really don't want to give them an exposed passage on the hardest part of the instrument to play, unless you want to make them look bad, in which case just give them changes. The pros and cons of doubles are very different from most other instruments, as while I usually assume the person playing is a professional and instead discuss the weaknesses of the instrument itself, doubles are the one aspect of the band where not everyone will be a professional, so you have to account for the weaknesses of the players as much as the weaknesses of the instrument. For example, while the clarinet and flute are as easy to play as fast as saxophone, saxophonists will regularly not have the technical skill to play these instruments quickly, so you have to give them easier parts they can actually play. They do, however, have the regular stamina buff of saxophone players where they'll be able to play for long amounts of time without their chops getting tired. Unless they're a really bad flute player, then they might pass out on stage. Due to not being played as much overall, intonation is usually an issue as well. Flutes can avoid this by using vibrato, but clarinets are kind of stuck just holding the note unless it's an orchestrate. This is where giving them other instruments that have the pitch helps a lot, as it'll center the intonation more. Essentially, you can think of them as having the same pros and cons as saxophone, but with worse intonation and a decent chance they won't be very good at the instrument. Like literally every other instrument, these work great with muted trumpet. Flutes and mutes even rhyme, so that one's clearly effective. The double gives the pitch, and is naturally quieter, so you get the color of the mute as well. This combination is much more common with flute, but also works with clarinet. Piano also works great with doubles, as they blend with it naturally and will always give a clear reference for pitch. Guitar and bass work for the same reason, although for guitar you're going to want to use a clean sound, as distortion guitar and flute is probably unideal. Overall, the main issue with this instrument is the players, as opposed to the instrument itself. For this instrument, you mainly want to think, what can I write that won't be an issue for the average saxophone doubler? Which is why they're mostly given pads and nothing too virtuosic. So honestly, just write them like most people write trombones.